All right, so now we're going to talk about monopolistic competition in the long run. Now, before I can really describe how the long run works for monopolistic competition, I first need to explain the idea of the demand curve shifting for an individual monopolistic competitor. Individual competitors can actually experience greater demand for their product or less demand for their product. So the idea here goes like this, is that in monopolistic competition, even though the products themselves are unique because they have special features or brand loyalty, they're still selling products that have similar features. So if you're a monopolistic competitor, you're still sharing demands with other companies, okay? So the idea here goes like this, is that this demand curve for this perfect competitor can shift to the right or to the left. Now, let me show you what happens if there's an increase in demand. If there's an increase in demand, this kind of flatter demand curve, but it's still downward sloping, it'll shift to the right. Okay, so I'm going to make it parallel here, but it's still going to be on the right-hand side, and that's going to be D prime. Now, when the demand curve shifts to the right, the marginal revenue curve is also going to shift to the right. And so it's going to shift to the right a little bit, but it's going to stay parallel to the previous marginal revenue. So we're going to call that marginal revenue prime. Now, watch this. The previous profit maximizing quantity was here, but our new profit maximizing quantity is now where the new marginal revenue intersects marginal cost. So when demand increases for an individual monopolistic competitor, so increase in demand is going to lead to an increase in the profit maximizing quantity. And it's also going to lead to, look at this, it's going to lead to an increase in price, because previously in the original, if we were to go up to the original demand curve, this is the price, but our new price, this is our new quantity, and it's going to go up to the new demand curve. And so you can see that that results in an increase in price. So when an individual competitor, monopolistic competitor, has an increase in demand, they will also produce a higher quantity and they will be able to raise their price. Okay? On the other hand, if demand decreases, okay, I'm going to use, I'll use orange for, well, green. I'll use green for a decrease. If demand decreases for a monopolistic competitor, it's going to shift to the left. So I'm going to draw it in parallel, and we're going to put in D double prime, which means that the marginal revenue curve will also shift to the left. We're going to make it parallel, same steepness, but to the left. That's MR double prime. We have a decrease in marginal revenue. Then our previous quantity was here, where marginal revenue intersects marginal cost. Okay, but now our new quantity is where the new marginal revenue intersects marginal cost, and you can see that there is a decrease, a leftward shift in the profit maximizing quantity. So when demand decreases, when demand for one particular firm's products, one particular monopolistic competitor, when their personal demand decreases, they will produce a smaller quantity because they have a lower profit maximizing quantity. Also, we can see the price, the original price would have gone up to this demand curve here and come over. This would have been the price before the change, but after demand decreases, our profit maximizing quantity will go up to our demand curve here, and you can see that there is a decrease in the profit maximizing quantity. And therefore, when a monopolistic competitor experiences a decrease in the demand for their stuff, they also will wind up lowering their price so that they can sell at the profit maximizing quantity. So it's important to understand that monopolistic competitors their price and quantity are sensitive to the demand for their particular product. And what we're going to talk about now is the idea that competitors share the demand then when there are entrants into the market, so that supply goes up, their individual demand will go down, and we'll see that in just a second. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about. What we're going to say is that industry supply affects individual demand. Now, we just saw what would happen to the price and the quantity of a monopolistic competitor if their demand goes up or if their demand goes down. If demand for their individual product goes up, their quantity goes up and their price goes up. If demand for their stuff goes down, their demand curve shifts to the left and their price goes down and their quantity goes down, right? Okay, well, what causes that to happen? What makes their demand increase or decrease? Well, one obvious thing that will cause their demand to increase or decrease is if there is an increase in demand in the industry or a decrease in demand in the industry. If overall industry demand changes, then their individual demands will change as well, okay? But that's not what I want to focus on here. What I want to focus on is what happens when there's a change in supply in the industry. What happens to the individual firms, okay? And in particular, what I'm talking about is I'm not talking about general supply. I'm not talking about a decrease in production costs causing an increase in supply. I'm talking about new entrants. So when I say an increase in supply, I mean new entrants, meaning in the long run, remember this only happens in the long run, that in the long run, new competitors will enter the market, and instead of there only being 3 competitors, now there's 4 competitors or 5 competitors, okay? Let's say there were only 3 companies who were producing a certain kind of soap, okay? Let's say soft soap. One company comes up with a great idea to make soap into a liquid that can be pumped out of a container onto your hand. Then 2 more companies figured it out, and now all 3 of these companies are making soft soap. Well, then 3 other companies or 5 other companies figure out how to make soft soap, and they all, in the long run, they all enter the market. And now there are 8 competitors instead of only 3. Well, that's going to be an increase in supply. That means because there are now more producers, this supply curve in the overall market, in the overall industry, is going to shift to the right, okay? And we know that that's going to result in a decrease in price, an increase in quantity, but a decrease in price. Here's the old equilibrium price. Here's the new equilibrium price. But how can we account for that decrease in price at the individual firm level? Well, the way we account for it is by this, is that when there are new entrants causing an increase in supply, that will then lead to a decrease in demand. Why is there a decrease in demand for each individual firm? Because now there are more companies selling the same product. Let's say that your company used to sell 1,000 units. But now when 5 new companies come in, 300 of the people who were buying from you stop buying from you and they start buying from one of the 5 other new competitors. Now you're going to lose 300 of your customers to one of the new sellers. Your demand is now going to go from 1,000 down to 700. That is going to be a leftward shift of your demand curve. So let's say that this is your company. That means that your demand curve is going to shift to the left. That's your new demand curve, D double prime. Your marginal revenue curve will also shift to the left, MR double prime. And this is your old quantity. This is the new quantity. You are now producing a smaller quantity. Quantity has shifted to the left, decrease in quantity. But also look at the price. This is your old price up here, and this is your new price right here. So your price has decreased as well. Your price has gone down, your quantity has gone down, and that accounts for what's happening here in the industry, that there will be a decrease in price in the industry. And so what I'm showing you here is that when there are new entrants into the market, that means that there will be a decrease in demand and a decrease in demand for the individual firms, and the D curve will shift left. And there will be a decrease in price, okay? And so we'll say here there will be a decrease in price, okay? And now we're going to see what happens when there is a decrease in supply, when there are firms that exit the market. All right, now let's talk about what happens when there are firms that exit the market, okay? And so let's say that there are 3 competitors in the market. This is you, this is one of your competitors, and this is another one of your competitors, okay? You guys are all in monopolistic competition, but nobody enters the market. The only thing that happens is that one of the competitors leaves the market. So this one is gone. They are no longer in the market. Now it's just you and one other competitor, okay? Now usually in monopolistic competition, there's lots more sellers than just a couple, okay? But we're just doing this as an example to understand the idea of demand increasing or decreasing. So we have firms exit the market. And when they exit the market, that means there's a decrease in supply. There are fewer suppliers, and because there are fewer suppliers, there will be a leftward shift of the supply curve, S prime, a leftward shift of the supply curve in the overall industry. Because there are fewer suppliers, whoever was buying from this firm over here still probably wants to buy. And so what they're going to do is they still want to buy the stuff, so they're going to go to your company and this other company to buy stuff. That means that you're going to have an increase in demand, okay? So your demand, the demand curve, is going to increase or shift to the right. And when your demand curve shifts to the right, your marginal revenue curve will also shift to the right, marginal revenue prime, and your quantity is going to increase. Here's your old quantity, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Here's your new quantity, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Your price is now going to go up. So you can see here, this was the old equilibrium. Now this is the new equilibrium. That is an increase in price in the market. Well, why is that happening? That's happening because your demand curve shifted to the right. And the exact same thing is going to happen over here with the other competitor that stayed in. You're probably both going to have an increase in demand. You're going to increase your quantity, profit maximizing quantity, and you're going to increase your price. And that's evidenced by an increase in supply over here in the regular industry, okay? And so now what that means is that a decrease in supply because firms are exiting will lead to an increase in demand in the individual firm. And when that happens, the demand curve will shift to the right. And when the demand curve shifts to the right, we know that that's going to result in an increase in the price. It's also going to result in an increase in the quantity. And so the reason I'm showing you this is because in order to understand monopolistic competition in the long run, we have to understand why there are circumstances where the demand curve for the individual firm is shifting to the right or shifting to the left. So now let's look at what happens to a firm that is either profiting or operating at a loss in the long run. All right, now let's see what happens to a monopolistic competitor in the long run. Now, the first thing I want to remind you about the long run is that there are no fixed costs, okay? No fixed costs, and therefore average total cost is the same as average variable cost. They are the same thing because all of the costs are variable in the long run. Therefore, we don't have a separate average variable cost curve. We only have an average total cost curve. We still have our downward sloping demand curve, but it's not as steep as a monopoly. We have our separate marginal revenue curve because we're price setters, and we have our marginal cost curve. Now let's first talk about zero economic profit. This is not zero economic profit. But what if it was zero economic profit? Would we be talking about a change in the market? No, because remember what we've said before is zero economic profit, that's normal for the long run. Everybody earns zero economic profit in the long run if they have a long run. Remember, monopolies don't really have a long run. Perfect competition does have a long run, and they lose all of their economic profit in the long run. But also losses. Nobody stays in the market if they're having a loss. So if a monopolistic competitor is earning zero economic profit, one of those four situations, if they're breaking even, then the long run isn't going to be any different for them. Okay? But if a monopolistic competitor is experiencing a loss or earning a profit in the long run, then there's going to be some changes in the market that are going to bring them to a place where they earn zero economic profit. That's what we're going to look at right now. So here, let's look at the circumstance of this monopolistic competitor. Let's find out what their profit maximizing quantity is. Here's marginal cost. Here's marginal revenue. Here's where they intersect. So this is their profit maximizing quantity. If we go up here to the demand curve, there's their price. And if we go to their average total cost curve, that's right here. And it looks like their price is higher than their average total cost. Therefore, this monopolistic competitor is profiting, right? This rectangle here represents their profit. The large rectangle is their total revenue. The smaller rectangle is their total cost. And so total cost is smaller than total revenue, so they have a profit. Yay! Except here's what's going to happen. In the long run, because there are low barriers to entry, all right, so here's what's happening in the long run. Under profit, because there are low barriers, okay, this will attract new entrants. This will attract new competitors. Other companies will say, hey, there's profit to be had over there. And even though information symmetry is imperfect, it's not secretive. So other companies do know that there is profit to be made. So because there are low barriers and because there is some info symmetry, okay, there will be new entrants into the market. This will attract new companies, new entrants into the market who want to get some of that profit. New entrants into the market leads to an increase in supply in the industry. Now, what we just learned is that when there's an increase in supply in the industry, that means that there will be a decrease in demand for the competitor. Okay, the individual competitor, individual competitor is going to have a decrease in demand. So this company right here that is getting some profit, this profit is going to attract new entrants, so supply will increase in the market and demand for the individual firms will decrease. And what that's going to lead to is a leftward shift of the demand curve. Okay, so the D curve will go left. The demand curve is going to shift to the left, and when it does, it's going to shift to the left here, and it's going to become tangent to the average total cost curve left of where it was before. Now the marginal revenue curve is also going to shift to the left. So we're going to have marginal revenue, double prime. And now our new, where marginal revenue intersects marginal cost will be here. We will have a decrease in quantity, double prime. And where we intersect or where we hit the demand curve and come over will now be equal to average total cost. And now our price is equal to average total cost, and we are now at zero economic profit. Okay? And so when a monopolistic competitor is experiencing economic profit in the long run, that economic profit will deteriorate because there will be new entrants into the market, and they will lose some of their demand and then have to lower their price, lower their quantity, and then it'll deteriorate their profits. Now let's see what happens when they're experiencing a loss. Okay, so now let's see what happens when there's a monopolistic competitor who's experiencing a loss in the long run. Okay, now in every likelihood, multiple of these competitors are experiencing a loss in the long run. And so they're all trying to figure out, what are we going to do? Well, the ones that are experiencing the biggest losses are going to shut down and leave the market completely. Okay, and this one in particular, who is experiencing a loss, and we can see this because where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, here's their profit maximizing quantity. And if you go up here, you can see that this is the price that they are charging, but you can also see that their average total costs are higher than their average total cost is higher than their price. Okay, so they are experiencing a loss here in the long run. And they probably would leave the market too, but what will happen is the ones that are struggling the most will probably leave first, and the ones that are only struggling a little, they may hang in there until things change. And this is what I'm going to show you is going to happen in the long run. In the long run, losses are not going to be sustained. They're not going to stick around, and here's why. What will happen is, because some of these competitors are experiencing losses, there will be exit from the market. Exit from market. Now, why are they exiting the market? Well, because barriers are low. Barriers to exit are low. So it's easy for these companies to get out of that market. They just shut down that division. They keep doing their business in their other areas that are profitable, but they just shut down a division, lay off some people, and they move on. And they just stop doing business in that industry. Okay. Now, when there is exit from the market, that leads to a decrease in supply in the industry. Now remember, when there's a decrease in supply in the industry, that leads to an increase in demand for the individual firms. All right? So anyone who stays in will have an increase in demand. Okay? And when demand increases for them, let me go ahead and use I guess I'll use green again. This demand curve is going to shift to the right and have a rightward shift of the demand curve, okay, which is going to go right here, D prime, and their marginal revenue curve is going to shift to the right, which will go right here, marginal revenue prime, increase in demand, increase in marginal revenue, and now here's the new intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost. So they have an increase in profit maximizing quantity, and look at that, they'll have an increase in their price, but also their price is equal to their average total cost now. So this is price, and it's also average total cost. Their average total cost came down a little, their price went up, and now this company is earning zero economic profit. And so the basic understanding you have to have here is that in the long run, if a monopolistic competition is experiencing a loss, but they're staying in the market, their demand will increase and they will go to zero economic profit. Okay? And so that is monopolistic competition in the long run.